Motherfucking Krogan. I get to play a Krogan, and I was so happy about that. I was so excited to play a Krogan. The Krogan are awesome. Like, I love the Krogan. The Krogan are probably my favorite part of Mass Effect. The Krogan are just so awesome and badass. But let's rein it back in. Alright gamers, this is Trey Guillotine back with a new episode of What You Gaming On, the video series where we start every episode by asking you, the listener, the viewer, the gamer, what are you gaming on? If you want to tell me what game you're playing, tell me in the comments, tell me what you like about it, what you don't like about it in the comments, or on any of my social media, and your answer will be featured in a future episode of What You Gaming On. We're going to go ahead and jump right into what I've been gaming on lately, and I've been going back and playing the Mass Effect trilogy. Well, not technically the trilogy, I just kind of skip over one because I feel like the gameplay of one is really raw. Like it's the first Mass Effect game, and the gameplay is not bad. It's just very raw and kind of clunky and not as enjoyable of a gameplay experience as Mass Effect 2 and 3. Not to say there's anything wrong with Mass Effect 1. It's just very like it's the bare bones foundation that the rest of the Mass Effect series was built on. But, you know, you can skip Mass Effect 1, and they actually have a DLC, Genesis, and Genesis 2 for Mass Effect 3. But they have a Genesis comic for Mass Effect 2, where you basically get to make the decisions from 1, or at least the big decisions from Mass Effect 1, that will then carry over into the rest of the series. So I'm playing Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3, and right now I'm in the middle of, I'm probably going to be beating it soon, in the middle of Mass Effect 3. And it's been a good couple years since I've played it. I probably haven't played it. Mass Effect 3 came out in 2012. So it's been... I probably the last time I played it was like 2014, 2015. So it's been a good few years since I've sat down and played the Mass Effect trilogy, or even Mass Effect Andromeda. Like I haven't played Mass Effect Andromeda in a minute. I beat it once. I haven't gone back and beaten it again yet. I am planning to go on from Mass Effect 3 on to Mass Effect Andromeda, but we're talking about Mass Effect 3. And it's bringing up a lot of memories of some of the arguments and some of the complaints and controversies that kind of followed Mass Effect 3, and just kind of, in my opinion, has since just... I mean, there's definitely been other issues with Mass Effect recently, specifically with EA and unfortunately Bioware and how they did Mass Effect Andromeda, or how they advertised Mass Effect Andromeda. There's definitely some issues we can get into. But Mass Effect 3 is kind of, as far as I can tell, the beginning of where people started to really have issues with some of the big things in Mass Effect 3. Now, you know, it's an EA title, it's an EA published game, so already that's kind of a mark of shame. Like, EA is definitely one of the characteristically greedier video game publishers out there. They, you know, do a lot with loot boxes, which a lot of people disagree with. I am one of them. I don't particularly care for loot boxes, and you know, there's even governments who were like making arguments that this is technically gambling and illegal, which I don't think it held up in court. But you know, there are definitely people who have problems with loot boxes. EA is a big a big person doing loot boxes. But a lot of the controversy with Mass Effect 3 was specifically over the ending of Mass Effect 3. If anyone remembers, it was like the infamous The Star Child and the quote-unquote cookie-cutter endings, and gamers were entitled to a better ending. And it was a big controversy, a big argument, very, very divisive is what Mass Effect 3. It was very divisive among fans of those who were fine with how the game was and those who weren't. And as much as I am fine with how the game was overall, I definitely have my own issues, but I don't want to say that those who weren't fine with it weren't justified. They did have some really justifiable issues, but personally, I thought Mass Effect 3 was overall fine, and there are 3 reasons why I think this. I'm going to try to go into them with as much perspective as I can of hindsight and be as objective as I can. But there are 3 issues for why I think Mass Effect 3 was was a good game. Like, it was a good game. It wasn't the best Mass Effect game. I think the best Mass Effect game is Mass Effect 2 for obvious reasons of great story, great gameplay, great characters, great moments where you just come out feeling like a total badass of surviving a suicide mission. I always make sure everyone lives because I work too damn hard on my characters that I'm not letting them die. But Mass Effect 3 was still, in my opinion, a good game. So the first reason I want to get into is specifically about the ending. So the big ending was with the Star Child, and it was very cookie cutter. At the very end, your decisions didn't totally matter, or at least they weren't reflected like we wanted them to be. In the ending moments, I'm not talking about I'm more talking about like the ending moments where everything is revealed and we discover what this entire Reaper war has been about and what's been going on here in the final moments of the game where we discover all that. But I want to argue that those ending moments with the Star Child and finding out what the Reapers were actually doing and why they were doing it isn't the only ending of Mass Effect 3. Mass Effect 3, it's the culmination of Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3. The big trilogy, which throughout the entire game series has had so many little subplots going on, where you had things about the Krogan and the Genophage, you had things about the Quarian and the Geth, you had things about Cerberus, you had so many little stories that were snowballing into something that was going to be resolved in Mass Effect 3, and Mass Effect succeeds at doing that. Mass Effect 3 as a game, from a story standpoint, is separated. Oh, did I just say standboy? Wow. Standpoint. Anyway, Mass Effect 3 is separated into basically 3 acts. You have the first act, where you resolve this 1,000-year conflict between the Krogans and the Turians and the Solarians and the rest of the galaxy, really, of curing the Genophage, the bioweapon that the Turians and Solarians launched against the Krogan to basically more or less sterilize them so that they couldn't reproduce as plentiful as they were, so they could get their urges, their violent urges and tendencies in check and not be a danger to the rest of the galaxy. This was a 1,000-year conflict, and that's something you resolve, and there are a number of ways you can resolve it. You can cure the Genophage, you can not cure the Genophage, you can lie about curing the Genophage. Rex can die, Rex can live, Mordin can die, Mordin can live. There's multiple endings of that story, of that first act, and you get that, and the choices that you made throughout the past games are reflected in that. If you killed Rex in Mass Effect 1, which is one of the bigger choices that you have to make in Mass Effect 1, if you killed Rex, then you have a completely new Krogan leader who isn't as great of a leader or great of a character as Rex was leading the Krogan in Mass Effect 3. Or you can have Rex in Mass Effect 3. Like, there's so many little things where your past decisions matter. The same goes on for that second act that is about the Quarian and the Geth War, which is, again, a 300-year history conflict between the Quarians and the Geth, the AI servants that they made that became sentient beings and were essentially discovered that they were a slave race. When the Geth became sentient, the Quarians decided to kill them off. It became a war. The Quarians lost. Basically, the storyline of Battlestar Galactica. If you need like a good summary of what the Quarian and Geth conflict is, it's Battlestar Galactica, with a few minor details changed. So mostly it's Battlestar Galactica, which isn't a bad thing. It makes for a good story. But again, the decisions that you made throughout Mass Effect 1 and 2 are reflected in this second act of ending, of finding a conclusion to the Geth and Quarian conflict, and you have multiple endings for that. You can let the Geth die, you can let the Quarians die, you could work to get them to work in peace, you can do multiple different things for this game to work out and have multiple endings to that conflict. And then in the third conflict, well, the third act is kind of where the ending is a little more the ending of, Cerberus and the Reapers, which is the third act. That's where it gets a little more cookie cutter, but even then, there are a number of ways you can end the Cerberus conflict before you go on to the last moments of the game where you ultimately decide the fate of the galaxy, there are multiple ways that that ending with Cerberus can take place, and your decisions from the past other games that you're talking about, and ultimately, like, basically debating the elusive man played by the amazing Martin Sheen, who, if I could be, if I could have that old man voice when I'm Martin Sheen's age, I'll be happy. Martin Sheen is just a fantastic actor, and his voice for the elusive man is perfect. But you basically debate the elusive man to whether you think he was right, you think he was wrong. You can convince him that he was wrong, and he can take his own life to end the Cerberus conflict. There are multiple things that can happen with that. So yes, the final moments of Mass Effect 3 were not that great. I don't think they were that bad. Like, when I first played it and I was first beating the game before the big controversy had come up and I'd beaten the game and it was very fresh, it wasn't an ending I was expecting, because the ending I was kind of expecting, I thought it was going to be more of an issue with dark energy, because that was a huge theme in Mass Effect 2 of dark energy building up in stars and making certain solar systems uninhabitable because the star was burning too hot, or some science jargon of why dark energy building up was messing up the star and the solar system. I thought that was going to have to do with the ending, but that wasn't what the ending had to do with it. But it did focus on another theme that was relevant in Mass Effect, which was the kind of ongoing conflict between organic beings and machines and AI, like the Geth, like the Reapers. That's what it ultimately had to do with, and I was surprised, a little confused. I was definitely a little confused. They could have, originally they could have given us that exposition of why this conflict was going on, why the Reapers were doing what they were doing. They could have done it better. They could have originally done it better. But ultimately, I thought the ending was fine. Like, I thought it was fine. When people started complaining about it, I was surprised. And again, they're not wrong, because, like, you basically get three choices of how you want to end this conflict, and the cinematics you got were almost just like the same cinematic with just like slight differences. So admittedly, the people who had issues with that were very justified. Like, their issues were relevant and actual. Like, there was definitely something there to argue about. But I don't think, like, for me, that didn't bother me as much. But going back now, after all the DLCs have been going, that's the second thing I want to argue for, is the DLCs themselves. Again, DLCs with EA is a hot button issue. A lot of people have issues with that, and one of the big issues with Mass Effect 3 was the fact that the DLCs they were selling to us were, some of them, or at least one of them, and I believe it's the Prothean DLC with Javik, at least that DLC was originally part of the main game. It wasn't a DLC, it was part of the main game, and people found out that story, that DLC, was basically cut out of the main game and then sold back to us for more money. Which, again, that's definitely something you can take issue with, and that's something I take issue with. Like, I think there's a lot of instances in video games where there are DLCs that should be part of the main game, that, especially if it was made to be part of the main game, and there was like, no, we're gonna lessen the main game, take something that was originally part of the main game, take it out and make it less, and then sell it back to you. That's like selling you a car without the engine, and it's like, well, now you have to buy the engine or your car's gonna not work. That was definitely an issue, but personally, my biggest issue with the DLCs is that there was one specific DLC, and it was a big DLC. I don't know if this was originally part of Mass Effect of Mass Effect 3 and was taken out, or it was always meant to be DLC, but the story of it is, in my opinion, something that absolutely should have stayed a part of the main game, because the Leviathan DLC explains the ending in such a much better way, in a more comprehensive and understanding way. It makes the ending make a lot more sense. And it tells you about literally how this entire Reaper cycle, Reaper War started in the very beginning, and it gives you that. It basically just cut and dry. Here's what happened, here's why it happened, and here's how we can try to stop it. It definitely clears up a lot of the questions people like me had at the end of Mass Effect 3. And I really feel that if there was a DLC that should have been a part of the main game, like you can play the main game without Javik and the Prothean, and it's not that big of a deal. Like, Javik adds some stuff in some areas, but ultimately not that big of a deal, aside from it just being the only living Prothean in the entire galaxy, aside from the collectors, which then well, I'll talk about that in a second. So yeah, the Leviathan DLC it explains the ending of the game much more in a much easier way to understand it than it happens because Starchild, which I really think that should have been there. But the other DLCs that I think really improve the ending and the overall game of Mass Effect 3 there's two more. There's one is the extended cut, which I'm pretty sure they never intended to do the extended cut until there was such a backlash and so many complaints about the ending that Bioware went in and basically made more scenes for the end of the game. That it fixed a lot of the things that people were having trouble with. Some things that, like, I thought, like, that's not an issue. You can make your own conclusion of how A led to B. You don't need to see it happen. You can make that conclusion yourself. But they did. They basically, spoon-fed how everything worked out in the ending. And then it definitely gave the Star Child more lines of explaining how the game is ending and why it's ending that way, and then made the epilogue it made the epilogue very similar to how they do it in Dragon Age, where there's just like a storyteller where so-and-so went off to do this, and so-and-so went off to do this, and so-and-so went off to do this. And that's kind of what they add to the ending of Mass Effect 3 is this epilogue of these really beautiful basically a beautiful slideshow of how everything is going to be now. Of how all of your decisions and everything do what it all leads to, whether it's prosperity for the Krogan and Quarian or not. They added that afterwards, but the other one they added, which was another free DLC, the extended cut, was a free DLC, which if they had made us pay for that, I guarantee you Bioware would have been shut down, would have been burned to the ground. Like that, even me, who I was fine with the ending as it was, but then they were offering a DLC to make the ending better, but you would have had to pay for it. That would have just ended my relationship with Bioware, which would suck because for the most part, I like Bioware's titles. But Extended Cut was a free DLC, and then they had another one I think came out with the Extended Cut. They came out at the same time, I think, was the Citadel DLC, which the Citadel DLC, which again, I don't think it was something they originally intended to do. I may be wrong on that. Maybe the Citadel DLC was ultimately one of the DLCs they had planned, but I don't think it was. I feel like it's not. I feel like the Citadel DLC was an apology letter to the fans of Mass Effect, and also a love letter to the fans of Mass Effect, because the entire Citadel DLC, from the maybe couple hour 4-mission campaign, and then all of the interactions that you get to have with all of the characters from both Mass Effect 1 and Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3 were just it really was fan service in just the best way possible. It was literally, you get to have these fun, really funny and enjoyable and sometimes emotional moments with these main characters that you've gotten to know over the last 3 games, that it really is, it's a farewell to these characters. Because Mass Effect 3, whether Mass Effect Andromeda continues or not, Mass Effect 3 was the end of that story. It was the end of Shepard's story. So being able to have those moments with your crew, with everyone in your crew, even like the last part of it is you get to just throw this big party with everyone in your crew, and it is emotional. And they even take like a family picture at the end, which every time I've done it, I've always taken the screenshot of it, and it's always somewhere, because they really are, as far as game characters can go, they become your family. So having that DLC to be able to say goodbye to them really carries weight. So, despite, Leviathan and Prothean needing to have originally been a part of the main story of the main game, the Citadel DLC and Extended Edition really does. It both fixes a lot of the issues with Mass Effect 3 and its ending, and also just adds another layer that's like, okay, I accept BioWare's apology. This kind of makes up for it, in my opinion. And the third and final thing that I personally think makes Mass Effect 3 such a good game is it has nothing to do with the story. It has nothing to do with the ending. It's just the multiplayer. And the multiplayer, when it was first announced that Mass Effect was going to have a multiplayer, we were kind of worried. I was especially kind of worried. One, because I feel like whenever video game series add a multiplayer component to like a future game, the focus shifts from the main solo game to the multiplayer, which is very much what I think happened to Halo. Like Halo 1 and 2 were just, it had some great multiplayer in it, but the stories were so good. And then I'm sorry, not multiplayer, Mass Effect. And then Halo 3, 4, and 5, while still good, the multiplayer was the main focus. The main focus of Halo now is just the multiplayer, and the story is a side thing, which I don't like. I like the main story. I like the solo story. But I was worried that was going to happen with Mass Effect 3, which some could argue that may be the issue, is that they didn't really care about the game or the story anymore, the ending, and they just, focused on the multiplayer. But when I played it, they came out in beta first, and I got right on it and started playing it. And like after I'd played the solo missions in the beta or the demo, I was like, you know what? Let me go play the multiplayer. I've got nothing else to do, and I loved it. And if you know me, I don't do multiplayer. I hate playing multiplayer. I don't like playing with other people, or I don't like playing against other people because I suck at it. So the fact that I just fell in love with this multiplayer, it's not PvP, so you're not shooting at other players, you're joining together and fighting waves of aliens and enemies, and it also gives you the opportunity to play as different races within Mass Effect, which, with BioWare's other title, Dragon Age, you got to choose, or at least in Dragon Age Origins and Dragon Age Inquisition, you got to choose what race and story you wanted to play. In Mass Effect 3, you didn't get that. You were always Commander Shepard, Human Spectre. So you didn't get to choose what race you wanted your main character to be. So in the multiplayer, you get that option. You get to create your multiplayer character, whether you want it to be a Turian or a Quarian or a motherfucking Krogan. I get to play a Krogan, and I was so happy about that. I was so excited to play a Krogan. The Krogan are awesome. Like, I love the Krogan. The Krogan are probably my favorite part of Mass Effect. The Krogan are just so awesome and badass. But let's rein it back in. But the multiplayer was just such a good multiplayer experience. It's the first multiplayer experience that I ever really got into. Like, so many play, Fortnite or PUBG or Overdrive, and so many people get into it. Mass Effect 3 multiplayer was my Fortnite. That was my multiplayer thing. Like, I could play hours of just the multiplayer. So yes, Mass Effect 3 had a lot of issues, and there were a lot of justifiable complaints with Mass Effect 3. Personally, I never had those issues. I didn't think the ending was bad. I didn't think the ending was quote-unquote cookie cutter, or at least if it was, it didn't bother me. I got my ending. I got my conclusion to all of the stories in Mass Effect 3, because I genuinely believe that the Mass Effect 3 ending isn't the only ending. You have the endings of so many other side stories that are just as relevant as the Reaper War. That, if you screw those up, well, I guess it really doesn't affect the ending that much. But, you still have those conclusions to those giant story arcs that we've loved so much. So I didn't hate the ending. I was fine with it. I liked the extended cut. I liked the stuff that they added to it, but for me, it wasn't necessary. Like, the things they explained more in the extended cut more or less were things that I'd made my own conclusions on, which were pretty similar. Like, one of the big problems with it was that people, there was like, well, how did your squad that was with you on Mass Effect at the end of the game, how did they get back on the Normandy all of a sudden? It's like, well, they probably just went back to the Normandy, took a shuttle or something. That was the conclusion I'd made on my own. But then one of the things they did with the extended cut is they literally show the Normandy coming to scoop up your crew for the end of the game. So it was stuff like that I was like, that wasn't necessary to show. Like, I'd made that conclusion on my own, but they showed it anyway, and it wasn't bad. It didn't make it worse. I didn't have a problem with them showing it, but it was a conclusion I had already made. But no, a lot of the issues with Mass Effect 3 are justified, but personally, I still think it was a good game. I thought the ending was fine. And I know a lot of people are going to disagree with that, and you're welcome to, objectively and politely share your opinion in the comments or on any of my social media of what you thought of Mass Effect 3 and the ending, but I personally thought it was fine. It wasn't the ending I was expecting, which is probably even better. It wasn't the ending I was expecting. I was surprised. I was caught off guard by it. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I've really enjoyed, playing Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3. Like I said, it's been a while since I've played them. And the Mass Effect series, including Andromeda, whether it continues or not, which I know with Casey Hudson now kind of in charge of Bioware, Mass Effect was his baby. And he said that Mass Effect is not dead. It's, because that's something that BioWare came out with shortly after Mass Effect Andromeda launched, and a lot of people had, of course, issues with it, was that, we're not going to do any more Mass Effect. And then the helm of BioWare was changed to Casey Hudson, who, when he was at BioWare, Mass Effect was his baby. And like, as soon as it was announced that Casey Hudson was going to be leading BioWare, was like, he's bringing Mass Effect back. And then shortly after he took the helm, he's like, Mass Effect isn't dead. It's not something we're working on right now, but it is going to come back. Mass Effect is going to continue in some way. I don't know if they're going to continue with Andromeda, like in Mass Effect Andromeda 2 or something. Personally, I think it would be really cool if they went back to if they kind of did like a trilogy of the First Contact War, where humans first discovered the Turians and the rest of the galactic community. I think that would be really cool if you got to, play something in that time period. That would be really neat. But we'll see. But they have said Mass Effect is not dead, that they are going to continue Mass Effect in some way. So I'm looking forward to that. And I'm sure other fans are as well. Because, I mean, even our problems with Mass Effect, I know there are fans out there who's like, yeah, we had problems, but Mass Effect is still our game. We still love playing this game. We're going to continue playing this game. And if Mass Effect Andromeda 2 or Mass Effect prequel trilogy comes out, we're going to play it. And people are probably going to have issues with it, because that's how people work. We all don't agree on the same things. We all have different opinions about the things that we love. And as long as we can talk about those things objectively and politely and friendly, that's a good thing. Sharing these ideas with each other in a friendly way is great. Telling someone to go fuck themselves and go kill themselves because they like the ending of Mass Effect 3 is not okay. But that's an issue I've talked about before, and we'll probably talk about again some other day. But now I want to hear from you. What did you think of the Mass Effect 3 ending and the series in general? Personally, I loved it, but I want to hear from you. So let me know what you think of Mass Effect 3. What did you think of the ending? What are your opinions on the trilogy and the series in general? Let me know in the comments of this video or on any of my social media. If you want your answer featured in a future What You Gaming On video, make sure to tell me what game you're playing in the comments, what you like about it, what you don't like about it, and your answer will be featured in an upcoming video of What You Gaming On. If you want to check out the rest of my content, or either my videos or any of my written content of Marvel TV shows, movies, and video games, go to TreyGuillotine.com. If you're a writer and you're looking for affordable editing services, go to that same website, TreyGuillotine.com, and click on the tagged editing tab, and let's start working together. So leave a comment with your thoughts on this video or on any of my social media, and subscribe to my channel to geek out some more. Keep on gaming, gamers. So Captain America, Thor, Hulk.